Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to look at a preview of the next patch coming in December. And while it feels like we just had one, this blows the October 31st update out of the water. It has way more changes than I expected, and while I've already noticed the odd bug here and there, this is, in my opinion, the best update we've had in a long time. That's not just because of balance changes, but it even adds a new tech to all civs and has UI changes that are very welcome. To start with the major UI update, the options menu now gives you the ability to turn on extended unit stats. And with that enabled, any unit or building you select will give extra details, including minimum range if applicable, their reload time, movement speed, and blast radius, even factoring in any civ bonuses that apply. It's going to put me out of a job here, but honestly, it's a great change and long overdue, as players already compare a lot of these values, having picked them up from the AoE2 wiki or YouTube videos. And this makes those basic stats more transparent, unfortunately aside from bonus damage, which isn't included. Pierce damage is also noted by an arrow in that mode, again just making things more clear. And if you don't like the change or find it an eyesore, you can always turn it off as well, so there's really no downside. Now, while they're working on the UI, I would absolutely love an option eventually for the tooltips to have a simplified resource cost only mode, as right now, if you want to have that tooltip enabled and see tech and unit costs, you get a ton of spam, like click to harvest from this tree, click to select this unit, etc., and way more info about units than most players probably care to read. A mode that assumes you played the game for more than 10 minutes, but haven't yet memorized every single unique tech cost in the game would be pretty great. I know there's probably mods that do that, but while they're already tinkering with the UI, let's make it a default option. Moving on from my Christmas wish list though, and into the general changes, the first is gates can now be locked before their construction is finished. This is a pretty simple but handy quality of life feature that I think we can all say would have been helpful at some point in a past game. Next, they say deer and other prey animals now have more consistency in how long they pause before moving when you're pushing them with a scout. Subjectively, it does feel more consistent when trying it out, and there's always a pause where you can line up your scout's angle. Previously, it would jump between the animal running before it felt like you were even close, or just stubbornly hold its ground randomly. So overall, I wouldn't be surprised if deer pushing is technically a bit slower with this change, but at the same time will be easier to do for beginners. Moving on to the next change, monks now instantly search for new healing targets instead of waiting for 3 seconds in between. I hadn't realized this was a hard-coded delay, and there were tricks to get around it, but it's a nice little passive boost to monk healing, meaning you'll actually get the proper amount of healing now in groups of low HP units. The next change is mule carts are now a lower priority than other units when fighting, and where previously enemies could get hung up on mule carts if they were closer, similar to how they behave around rams, that is no longer going to be the case. I'm not sure if that's always going to be an advantage with melee units, but with ranged units, that was pretty clearly not intended behavior. The next big change is a doozy, and it's a massive overhaul to monk conversions. Previously, monks had a conversion window between their 4th and 10th attempt, with roughly a 25% chance of conversion each attempt that take just over a second to do, all of which led to some very quick but also very long possible conversion times. The devs are shortening that window by about 1 second in each direction and increasing the chance to 40% each attempt. And the way those numbers work out, there's now a 4 in 5 chance of a conversion happening over a relatively short window of time. They say the average time is the same after this change, but the variability and randomness is greatly toned down. In general, unit resistance is also going to be simplified behind the scenes by adding an equal amount to the minimum and maximum conversion length. All of this just means more simplicity and consistency, but technically a similar average time to before. Compounding on top of this, they're also going to split the tech faith, adding a new Castle Age tech called Devotion, which adds 1 to the minimum and maximum. This is going to be given to all civilizations, including Teutons with their team bonus and Sicilians with First Crusade to stack on top. Faith is then becoming cheaper and gives another 4 seconds to the average conversion time, making them roughly 50% harder to convert, meaning they end up about as difficult as before, but with a bit of its effect available in Castle Age. Given the effort put in to keep the average conversion time similar after the changes, the biggest thing here from a player perspective is really that Castle Age Knights now have a tech to help resist enemy monks, even if it's just roughly 1 extra second, compared to the nearly 2-second reload time between a knight's attacks. Another big change is coming to the Dromon, which is going from 50 attack and some cosmetic extra projectiles to having all 5 of its projectiles deal 10 damage, with some corresponding rescaling of its bonuses. It also has a larger area of attack now, and considering ships don't have melee armor to protect against it, this makes them not just a little better, if anything, at damaging mass groups of ships, but even against castles, they actually do a little more damage, I found now, with some basic upgrades researched. I take this as a buff to the unit overall, though it's a good candidate for a deeper dive at some point to try various buildings and enemy ships. At least in theory, this change does leave them a little worse against things with very high melee armor, for example. All this so far are just general changes though, and now let's talk about the notable civilization-specific ones, some of which are pretty dramatic. We'll start off with the Armenians, who have a tweak to their extra arrow naval bonus, which for the galley line is now changed to always be an arrow. This is a really simple and clever change, as the big problem with it was that the extra arrow does just 1 damage, but looked incredibly scary, like it was doubling the damage from a group of galleons. Now, the size of the projectiles clearly communicate Armenians have a main attack plus a tiny bit extra. The other change is that the bonus also now applies to the Dromon, which is much more significant, giving it 6 instead of 5 projectiles, which remember all do full damage now. So this is just a flat 20% boost to their attack against enemy naval units or enemy buildings. Next up, for Bengalis, they have 2 changes to the Wrath Chariot unique unit, giving it more cavalry archer armor, helping against skirmishers, as well as a bit of trample damage when in melee mode, damaging adjacent units with each attack, which thematically makes a lot of sense. Neither is a radical change for the unit, but adds their +2 bonus damage against skirmishers to make that a less potent counter. Moving on to Bohemians, they're getting a series of nerfs to the non-elite Hussite wagon with reduced HP and damage, as well as a longer training time for the non-elite and elite version. This makes sense and is a timely nerf, given Bohemians are kind of running away with things on the ladder. I recently looked into them as a big winner in the stats lately, and while this patch retains the core change from September of making them a decent hit-and-run unit, it tones them down a bit in Castle Age specifically. This of course also has the side effect of making their elite upgrade a little more important to pick up, since it's going to have a greater HP and attack benefit. Next up, for Chinese, their town center population space and line of sight bonus is being powered up. I get what they're going for here, with Chinese being particularly weak at low levels, and their unusual start being at least a factor and often pointed to for that. It feels like they're trying to gently nudge players toward not immediately building houses, and instead put villagers immediately on sheep, which is the correct way to play the Chinese opening. Finding your first sheep isn't really an issue these days, but of course more line of sight never hurts, especially since many players are probably a little slower to start scouting with the hectic loom and 6 villager opening. At the same time, it gives higher level players here the equivalent of 1 free house in Dark Age, and saves some houses when booming on multiple town centers. So for high levels, it's still a bit of a buff, where those players would argue Chinese don't need it. I'm curious to see how this plays out, but I like the idea on paper. Moving on now to the Georgians, despite being at the bottom of the ladder this patch, they're actually getting a couple of nerfs. The first is their repairing team bonus is being cut in half to just 25% fewer resources to repair for your team. This moves it from being situationally really good to hard to find cases it's going to make a noticeable difference, as remember repairing already has a 50% lower cost to begin with, and I have to admit it feels antithetical to Black Friday weekend to roll back a discount, but here we are. In fairness, Georgian buildings already take reduced damage on hills, so it could be a case where this bonus stacks too much with others, and with team bonuses you always have to be a little conservative because of all the possible interactions. The other change for Georgians is the Manaspa no longer incorrectly receives unintended extra damage against various things when in a large group. Bug fix or not, this is basically a nerf to that unit from the current patch, and I think some players might have expected some sort of improvement given their low win rate, but it makes sense to me the devs want to continue to assess the unit and Georgians' balance as a whole for longer before tweaking anything too far. As much as there's an instinct to react to the stats right away, between the Mule Cart and Fortified Church, I think they take a little more time to gauge than previous new civs. At the same time, it wouldn't be shocking if they eventually got some buffs, like removing the -50 food penalty for example, as a simple fix. Next up, for Hindustanis, their villager discount is being powered up slightly by 3% in all ages. Remember, Hindustanis went from rank 1 to about rank 30 when all aspects of this bonus were dropped by 5%, so it shows you how delicate their balance can be. While the numbers are a little awkward now, and it's just 1 or 2 food per villager, we've seen that scale of change can matter over a large number of games, and I expect this will be an effective, albeit not super creative way to help out a mediocre civ at the moment. Moving on to the Huns, they have 2 changes. The first is a slight speeding up of the Tarkin to now match the speed of a cavalry archer, and now faster than knights, which is something you don't have to memorize or look up now, as they have extended stats as an option. More significant, Huns are now going to start with a unique scouting horse on nomad-style maps once their first town center is completed. Not only is it a scout like the Georgians' mule cart, but it can actually convert sheep, so Huns are almost definitely top tier on any nomad-style map. I think it's a fun change, though obviously it's a huge advantage, especially on team games, where you'll not only get way more sheep, but your whole team will have a much better idea of where your opponents are and what they're doing. Next up, for Koreans, pretty simply, the turtle ship is going to receive the attack ground ability. Arguably, this makes a lot of sense if bombard cannons can do it, though turtle ships already benefit from ballistics and have a lightning-fast projectile. Personally, I think scorpions are the ones that would benefit much more from this change. Moving on to the Persians, their Savar unit received a couple of nerfs. First, reducing their bonus against archers by 1, meaning they no longer take out arbalesters in 2 hits anymore, assuming all upgrades. They also have a slightly longer upgrade time, though still shorter than a paladin, and it's really not a lot of nerfs for a civ that's been really good all of a sudden. Admittedly, it felt odd that Savars got +3 on top of Persian paladins' already existing team bonus against archers, as its pierce armor already makes it so much better than paladins against archer units, so it looks like they're holding on to their recent gains for the time being. Next up, for Poles, they had a pretty simple buff, dropping the Folwark's cost from 125 wood to the same as the mill at 100 wood. It's pretty crazy how far Poles have fallen, from when they generated 50% gold from stone, and the Folwark gave 10% food instantly, which have been reduced to 33% and 8% respectively. While this change looks small, it's actually a pretty nice boost for the early game, making the first Folwark a little cleaner to build at the usual time. Paying an extra 25 wood was a small thing, but sometimes made them slightly awkward to play in Dark Age, at least with your usual timing going for berries. The Folwark itself already has a significant trade-off, encouraging more exposed feudal farms away from your town center, and I guess the devs felt it didn't need a higher cost on top of that. And finally, for Portuguese, just a simple change here, lowering the organ guns attack by 1, but raising their bonus against infantry and skirmishers to offset that. Basically, it keeps them good against what they're meant to be, but a little weaker against things like knights and siege, and just generally more impacted by high pierce armor. Overall, I have to say, this looks like a great patch, with some tweaks that are going to have to be figured out over time. The general changes to conversions being more consistent, with a new mini faith tech in Castle Age, Dromons being more powerful, Bohemians taking a nerf, Chinese again being tweaked with singly new players in mind, and Huns becoming a nomadic superpower are all changes I can get behind. I actually can't recall a patch I've liked this much, so for me it's definitely the best one in a while, and totally unexpected after we just had some balance changes recently. Unironically, I'm a little surprised Sicilians didn't get a nerf, considering, like Bohemians, they've suddenly started doing surprisingly well after a recent patch. But other than that, I think the devs hit the pressing needs at the moment in terms of balance, but let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.